The Importance of the Kurds, a people who hold the key to the Middle East. This podcast, produced by Kurdish Media, explores who the Kurds are, what they have endured, and their historical and strategic significance in the Middle East. It sheds light not only on the past, but also on the future of this region. We highly recommend watching it until the end, because this story is not only the story of the Kurds, it is the story of all of us. Part 1. In the Shadow of the Mountains. The geography and identity of the Kurds. Beyond the mountains, there lives a people who have inhabited their own land for centuries, but have been defined on the maps of others. This people did not live on the margins of history, but at its very heart, yet they were often pushed aside, their voices suppressed. This people are the Kurds. To understand the Kurds, it is not enough to ask who they are. We must also ask where they live, because there is an unbreakable bond between the story of the Kurds and the lands they inhabit. From the Zagros Mountains to the Taurus Range, from the Tigris and Euphrates basins to the Iranian Plateau, stretches a vast zone, a region known throughout history and in collective memory as Kurdistan. It may not be clearly drawn on official maps, but it has existed in the minds of the people for centuries. Today, Kurds are spread across 4 countries: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. But modern borders could not divide their voice, culture, or connections. Because being Kurdish is not only an identity, it is a sense of belonging, a way of life. It is the will of a people to take root not only in land, but in the past and the future. In ancient sources, they were called by many names: Kardukians, Medes, Gutians, Subartians. But they always lived in highlands, cradled by the mountains. Throughout history, this people never chose the comfort of the lowlands, but the harsh yet free embrace of the mountains. With the spread of Islam, Kurds were among the first to adopt the new religion. During the Abbasid, Seljuk, and Ottoman periods, they held important roles. In the 12th century, Saladin Ayyubi's recapture of Jerusalem from the Crusaders is just one example of how the Kurds changed the course of history. Saladin was not just a commander, he is the symbol of a proud legacy preserved in the collective memory of a people. During the Middle Ages, Kurdish principalities were established in regions like Bitlis, Batan, Hakkari, Badinan. These principalities functioned both as a buffer and a balance between the Ottoman and Safavid empires. They tried to preserve internal autonomy, while avoiding being crushed between great powers. But starting in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire's policy of centralization began targeting these structures. The 1847 Bedirhan Revolt was suppressed, and the period of autonomy came to an end. From that point on, the fate of the Kurds would no longer be shaped solely in their own mountains, but also by the politics of the states they were made subordinate to. During the Republic period, Kurdish identity was systematically denied. Their language was banned, village names were changed, speaking Kurdish became a crime. Kurds were subjected to false labels like Mountain Turks, stripped of their identity. These oppressive policies inevitably led to uprisings, conflicts, and fragmentation. Yet despite everything, the Kurds have never been only victims. They defined themselves as a people without a state, but with identity. They voiced what was silenced, turned what was forbidden into song. Every lament became history, every strain a memory. Dengbages wrote history through voice, women carried the resistance on their shoulders, children grew up clinging to their language. Today, Kurds live in the shadows of Diyarbakir's walls, on the shores of Lake Van, in the streets of Mahabad, behind the barricades of Kobani, and in diaspora cities like Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, with the same feeling: to exist, to take root, to not be forgotten. And without understanding this people, one cannot understand the Middle East. Part 2. A buffer people in history, from the Treaty of Qasr-e Shirin to the present. The Kurds have not only been a people throughout history, but also a borderline, a buffer. In the center of geography, but always left out of decisions, always caught in the middle of wars. This fate does not reflect their identity, but the historical role that was imposed upon them. For centuries, the Kurds lived at the fault lines where empires clashed. And every time great powers confronted one another, the Kurds became the buffer people of that conflict. Romans and Persians, Byzantines and Arabs, Ottomans and Safavids, and later, modern nation-states and imperial forces, all of them viewed the Kurds as a tool of balance. Neither full allies, nor absolute enemies, but always an instrument, a barrier, a border stone. The clearest example of this balanced strategy was the Treaty of Qasr-e Shirin, signed in 1639 between the Ottoman and Safavid empires. This treaty laid the foundation for today's Turkey-Iran border. But that border didn't just separate two empires, it also divided a people. Kurds were fragmented on their own land. Part came under Ottoman rule, the other under the Safavids. And this division wasn't only geographic, it fractured their identity, language, governance, culture, and destiny. That rupture defined the Kurds' shared fate. Kurdish lands became the stage where the policy of divide and rule was most deeply applied. Whenever a Kurdish principality grew stronger, another one was set against it. Whenever unity emerged, intervention came from Istanbul, Tehran, Baghdad, or Damascus to break it apart. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire's drive towards centralization accelerated this process. Autonomies granted to Kurdish principalities were revoked. Powerful leaders like Bedirhan Bey were crushed. The state began to view the Kurds not just as an issue of governance, but as a problematic people. This perception intensified in the Republican era through harsher policies of denial and assimilation. At the beginning of the 20th century, as empires collapsed, nation-states rose. The Turks, Arabs, and Persians established their own states, but the Kurds once again were left in between. They did not become a nation with a state, but minorities divided among 4 different countries, and within each they were suppressed, fragmented, silenced. But perhaps the most striking truth is this: the Kurds have always been a border on the maps of others, but never a center on their own. They did not define borders, they carried them. This is not just a historical coincidence, but a strategy. Divide a people, and you weaken them. Make them a border, and you estrange them from one another. And this strategy has been used on the Kurds for centuries. But history is not only made of tragedies. Within every fragmentation, a seed of resistance has sprouted. The Republic of Mahabad 1946, the Kurdistan Regional Government 2005, the Autonomous Administration of Rojava 2012. Each is a manifestation of the Kurdish will to determine their own destiny. And that will was not erased by peace with Rome, nor by the border drawn at Qasr-e Shirin, nor by the lines on modern maps. Because the existence of the Kurds is not defined by borders, but by memory, culture, and belonging. Part 3. New Imperial Plans. The Promised Land, the David Corridor, the Greater Middle East Project, and the Kurds. History is not only a trace of the past, it is also a blueprint for the future. When we look at the history of the Middle East, we don't just see the maps of the past, we also see today's planned invasions, foreign interventions, and projects that reshape nations. Today, just as a century ago, the Kurds are once again being summoned to the stage because of their strategic position. But this call is rarely about freedom. It is mostly for the plans of others. So what are these plans? First, the Promised Land, Arz Mavud. A map of belief rooted in the Torah, a territory stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. This includes parts of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and southeastern Turkey. It is no longer just a religious dream, it has become the geopolitical doctrine and goal of modern Israel. Second, the David Corridor. A strategic plan for an Israeli sphere of influence stretching from Lebanon through Syria, Iraq, and Iran, reaching the Persian Gulf. This is not merely a military route. It's a project constructed through security, energy, and demographic engineering. And among the peoples who live along this corridor, the most critical are the Kurds. The purpose of this regional design is not only protection, it is part of a larger agenda shaped by energy routes, regime changes, and population manipulation. The Greater Middle East Project. Launched in the early 2000s by the United States, this project aimed to redesign the borders, regimes, and internal balances of 23 countries. And in this restructuring, Kurdish geography was not just a passageway, it was seen as a central target. Because the areas where Kurds live are both geopolitically central and fragile in terms of ethnic and political composition, making them convenient for manipulation. The United States has been the chief supporter and executor of these plans. In Iraq, before Saddam Hussein's fall, it established a no-fly zone to protect the Kurds. After the 2003 invasion, it legitimized the Kurdistan Regional Government (KRG). In Syria, it supported the formation of the autonomous administration in Rojava. But none of this was truly for peace or human rights. It was to build a new order with Israel at its center. So where do the Kurds stand in all of this? Are they true actors, or simply leverage, a bargaining chip, a temporary ally? The answer is clear. Today, the Kurds are often seen as a tool in these imperial projects. Legitimize American military presence, strengthen Israeli border security, encircle Iran and balance Turkey. Kurdish regions are viewed as strategic assets. This has little to do with the legitimate aspirations of the Kurdish people and everything to do with global power games. And too often, under the label of supporting the Kurds, these plans only further isolate and endanger them. Portraying the Kurds as proxies of empire undermines their rightful demands. Among other peoples of the Middle East, it promotes the image of the Kurds as collaborators or separatists, an image used to weaken intercommunal peace. But the truth is much more complex. The Kurds are a people seeking freedom, but that demand must not be drawn on others' maps. It must rise from their own memory. If the peoples of the Middle East truly wish to stop these projects and build peace, they must first see this truth. The Kurds are not a means, they are a people. Their right to self-determination must come not through imperial agendas, but through equality between nations. And that is why, without understanding the Kurds, there can be no peace in the Middle East. And without thinking together with the Kurds, there can be no true independence. Part 4. The Doctrine of Peace, the Unity of Peoples, and the Liberation of the Middle East. Today, the Middle East has become a region where borders are drawn with blood, languages are banned, and brothers have been turned into enemies. But this is no coincidence. This order is the result of a strategy that began with the fall of the Ottoman Empire and was shaped by imperial powers. In 1916, the region was divided on maps through the Sykes-Picot Agreement. In 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres, and in 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne determined the fate of nations at the negotiating table. The Kurds were seen as a problem. The Arabs were divided into competing microstates. The Turks were isolated within a republican ideology. The Persians were left in a closed yet interventionist role. This hostility among the four great peoples is the legacy of British and French colonialism, and today a continuing policy of the U.S.-Israeli alliance. Because divide and rule is not just a historical strategy, it remains one of the most effective geopolitical weapons today. In light of this, one truth is now clear. Lasting peace and justice in the Middle East is only possible if people stop seeing each other as enemies. And the people who hold the key to this peace are the Kurds. Because the Kurds share the same land with Arabs, live under the same mountains with Turks, read the same poetry as Persians, yet they have never fully belonged to any of them. That's why the Kurds are both a bridge and a measure of justice. It is time to recognize Kurdish-Turkish peace is not just an issue between two peoples. It is a precondition for democratization in Turkey and the liberation of the region. Kurdish-Arab brotherhood is the antidote to sectarian conflicts and border wars. A shared history, shared pain, shared culture. These are enough for unity. Kurdish-Persian peace is the way to show that ancient civilizations can once again stand side by side. The most poetic voice of the Iranian plateau can only be completed by the free voice of the Kurdish highlands. Unless these peoples, Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Persians, act together, the Middle East will always remain a playground for foreign powers. Attempts by actors like the US and Israel to dominate the region can only be challenged through true solidarity among the peoples themselves. Because imperialism doesn't just arrive with tanks, it arrives through ideas, narratives, and the distances it plants between us. That is why, to know the Kurds is not only to understand a people, but to develop a philosophy of peace. To exclude the Kurds is not only to exclude an ethnicity, it is to reject the future, hope, the region, and a civilization. This is not an ideology, it is a doctrine. Without the Kurds, there is no peace. Without peace, the Middle East cannot heal. And unless peoples understand each other, no people can write its own destiny. Final words. The Kurds must understand this. The Turks must understand this. The Arabs must understand this. The Iranians must understand this. It is time to stop drawing war plans and start drawing peace maps. And at the center of that map, there must be the Kurds. Because they are not only the victims of this geography, they are its key. If you enjoyed this podcast and found it valuable, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video, and share it with others. You're also welcome to leave your thoughts and comments below. Respectfully presented by Kurdish Media.